Action, exploration, and mystery are some of the cornerstones of movies released in the 80s, movies like Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Recently, I sat back and thought, what if somebody made a game that tried to capture the spirit of those sorts of movies? That's when I looked at the Uncharted series that I've totally never played. Luckily, indie game Pathway makes it much easier for me to enjoy a game that pays homage to those older 80s flicks without playing a huge back catalog in a long-winded series. Created by relatively unknown indie developer Robotality and published by the much more well-known Chucklefish, makers of games like Stardew Valley and Risk of Rain, Pathway is best described as an Indiana Jones-themed choose-your-own-adventure game mixed with XCOM. You take the role of several adventurers who set out on various quests of your choosing, and there's plenty of mystery and intrigue to be found here. With each new scenario your adventurers wind up in on their journey, you're often offered at least 2 or 3 options. Naturally, not every outcome is favorable, but as they say, fortune favors the bold. Each adventurer has different strengths and weaknesses. Each of them is proficient in certain kinds of weapons and armor, can do specific tasks during your adventure that other adventurers can't, and picking your 2 starting adventurers can be a bit of a daunting task. Do you bring an adventurer that can heal in battle? Someone proficient with rifles? You can hit those long-range targets during fights? Perhaps what you need is someone who has a specific trait that can help you during various scenarios along your way. The number and variety of choices is technically fairly small, but a bit intimidating, especially as you unlock more adventures as you play the game. Combat takes place in a grid system with turn-based combat that sees you moving and acting on your turn before handing the reins to the enemy, and you go back and forth until someone wins. While it lacks the sort of depth and technicality that games like XCOM have, this makes the price of entry much more affordable for casual players, which is good because most of the things that make XCOM great also can make it extraordinarily frustrating. Luckily, Pathway takes a lot of the good things from those sorts of tactical turn-based games and leaves a lot of the bad things behind. One thing that makes Pathway stand out from its brethren, beyond its choose-your-own-adventure style narrative choices, is the fact that even if you lose, you never lose your adventurers completely. They need some time to heal before you can use them again, but your money, items, and experience points carry over, so even if the game can be a bit frustrating to start, there's a sense of progression with each loss that inches you ever closer to a completed adventure. If you're frustrated, you can always give yourself a greater advantage, like more ammo for your guns and fuel for your Jeep, or giving enemies lower health and damage. The developers consider these adjustments a casual experience, but early on, this sort of thing is unfortunately necessary to avoid a frustrating experience. Any of Pathway's adventures can always be approached later on with normal or higher difficulty if you're looking for a greater challenge. So while Pathway's somewhat unique gameplay and amazing pixel art make up the backbone of the game, there's also a myriad of problems that stick out. One of these is the fuel system for the Jeep. Traditionally, on a normal run, your Jeep starts out with 10 fuel, and each spot you visit costs you 1 fuel to reach. Without increasing the starting amount, you'll often find yourself running out of fuel mid-adventure, and setting out on foot is unrealistic unless you're right next to the end, because each move you take outside your Jeep forces you to take damage until you make it to the end or inevitably fail the adventure. This isn't quite that bad because you can use money to allow your Jeep to carry more items and fuel, but then this sort of encourages you to take every possible risk to find fuel that very rarely drops on less casual difficulties. Combat, while solid and easy to grasp, tends to be one of the more annoying parts of the game, though with some careful maneuvering and being adverse to risk-taking when the narrative prompts it, you can minimize fights that you get into. Even then, when you're forced to fight, which is still very often, it's difficult to play strategically because enemies seem to have huge movement grids that often allow them to circumvent your carefully planned hiding spot and deal major damage to you. As a result, each movement is made with the hopes that the enemy can't just walk halfway across the map and shoot you in the back on their turn, as is often what happens even at lower difficulties. The rest of Pathway's faults, I feel, are more nitpicks than anything else, and the game does have options, as mentioned previously, that makes the experience a little less frustrating. So overall, Pathway is a fun game that doesn't take huge chunks of time out of your day, each adventure usually only taking about 30 minutes to an hour with minimal fights, and at $16 on Steam as of this review, I feel like the price is right. Just don't expect to spend hundreds of hours to get through the content here unless you're the sort of masochist that puts every possible obstacle the game provides in your way. Thanks for sticking around to the end, and be sure to like the review if you enjoyed it, slam that subscribe button, and then join us on social media, links in the description below. See you next video.